Chapter 41. Let Her Go. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sky had turned dark. As the car drove down the road leading from H City to the suburbs, Jiang Ruolin held her phone tightly. Xian Zihao said that he would arrive soon in his text, but it was already an hour, and he was nowhere to be seen. Could it be that she would go to the Xian's mansion like that without preparation? According to others, with just one command from Xian family, the entire city would tremble. Xian family was a well-known family in the eyes of all the Chinese in the world. She also heard that General Xian, who was over 80 years old, had a terrible temper. Just as Jiang Ruolin was worried about her unpredictable situation, two blinding lights flashed from behind the car. Stunned, she turned her body to look, but she couldn't open her eyes entirely because of the bright light. Jiang Ruolin raised her hand to block the light, and between her fingers, she saw a car speeding towards her at incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, the car passed the military jeep she was riding in. Soon, two ear-piercing brakes were heard one by one. Jiang Ruolin almost crashed into the front of the car when the car braked suddenly. She hurriedly stretched out her hand in front of her chest to avoid hitting the seat. A familiar black Land Rover had stopped right in front of their car, blocking their path. The two men in front of her were startled by the sight of the car. They looked at each other after seeing the car clearly. The middle-aged man looked back and saw the phone in Jiang Ruolin's hand. He immediately understood and his eyes showed remorse. He felt regret for not grabbing her phone as soon as she got in the car. The two men rushed out. On a dark night, the dark clouds that covered the sky and the stars and the moon were also gone. A faint cold wind blew, signaling that it was going to rain. Xian Zihao slammed the car door and walked towards them. With a cold look in his eyes, he said, "Let her go." "Young Master Xian." The two men approached him, smiled, and said respectfully, "The old master ordered us to bring the young madam to Xian's mansion." Xian Zihao didn't have much patience. His cold gaze drifted towards Jiang Ruolin, who was sitting upright in the car. She did not know whether she must get out of the car or not. "Young Master Xian." As they tried to block his path, Xian Zihao stopped and looked at the older man. His cold gaze caused the person's expression to freeze slightly. After hesitating for a while, the arm that was blocking him slowly drooped down. Xian Zihao immediately walked to the car and opened the car door. He looked at the woman inside. His lips slightly pursed as he said, "Get out." Jiang Ruolin hurried out of the car. Because the car was too high, she almost fell to the ground. Xian Zihao immediately pulled her hand and dragged her to his car. When she got into the car, she suddenly shouted, "My luggage." Xian Zihao said calmly, "Wait a minute." He closed the door on his side and drove his car, which he parked in the middle of the road, to the side of the road. Chapter 42. Heavy Rain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the way home, it rained heavily. Heavy rain made the road to the city closed. Looking at the traffic in front of him, Xian Zihao turned off the car engine and parked it on the side of the road. The lights in H City were on at the moment, but some street lights on this street were already broken. All around it was dark and quiet, and the sound of heavy rain falling around the car was heard. No one spoke. Only when Xian Zihao's phone rang, did she turn to look at him. Seeing that he did not answer, she said softly, "Your phone rang." Finally, Xian Zihao moved. He looked at the number and immediately switched off the phone. He set aside his phone when he saw the traffic finally moving. He started the car and drove slowly. After moving a distance of 3 meters, both were once again trapped in traffic jams. They could also hear the sound of sirens and quarrels in front of them. Jiang Ruolin tried to observe what was happening in front of her when she suddenly heard the sound of the car door open. As she turned around, she saw Xian Zihao get out of the car. "Wait. It's raining heavily outside." Her voice was interrupted by the sound of the car door closing from the outside. She looked at the tall figure walked through the heavy rain recklessly. Jian Ruolan remembered that she had an umbrella in her bag and quickly took it. It was raining heavily outside, and Xian Zihao would have a fever if he were soaking wet like this. Quickly, she hurried out of the car. It was raining so hard that she couldn't see the view in front of her. Jian Ruolan vaguely remembered the direction that Xian Zihao had taken, so she walked in that direction rapidly. On this stormy night, the umbrella in her hand almost flew several times due to the wind. Looks like your car was stuck here too, just like us. If we keep waiting like this, we might get stuck here until tomorrow morning, waiting for the traffic police to arrive. That's right, the road ahead was closed. If it weren't for your carelessness, our car would have passed. You've seen the road condition but you're still speeding your van. Sorry, I'm sorry. Who would have thought there would be a big hole in the side of the road? I ignored it, and the wheels suddenly got stuck. I did not expect this to happen. Hearing the commotion from the other side, Jian Ruolan saw the rear wheels of a medium-sized van had sunk into a small hole in the highway and could not be driven away. Under these circumstances, someone usually will call for help or inform the police. The crane tried to pull the van, but due to the road in front was blocked by heavy rain, the crane could not get past it. At the same time, she saw Xian Zihao, leaning on the back of the van, apparently where the van had fallen. He stood up and said something to the anxious driver nearby. Jian Ruolan stood farther away from the others, though, she still saw the faces of those around him shining with a little hope. All right, let's try it. After a brief discussion, the van's driver nodded and got back into the van to restart the engine. 4 or 5 men nearby pushed the back of the van with all their might. Chapter 43. Heavy Rain 2. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The number of people helping gradually increased to 7 or 8 people. Soon, there were more than 10 people, and Xian Zihao was among them. After more than 10 minutes of effort, they finally managed to push the van out of the hole. Cheers were immediately heard from everyone, and everyone's faces were colored with a sense of accomplishment. When Jian Ruolan saw Xian Zihao, she quickly chased him with an umbrella in her hand. Even though his body was drenched, she still held the umbrella over his head. It's raining too much. I wanted to give you an umbrella, but it looked like I'm late. Jian Ruolan suddenly smiled as she watched Xian Zihao's drenched body. Her clear eyes shone like the stars amid the light flickering around her. I was afraid I was just adding to the load, so I just stood by and watched for a moment. Xian Zihao knew that she was saying it on purpose. He looked at her with disdain. Get in the car. I guess it won't be long before we can leave. Jian Ruolan nodded with a smile and placed an umbrella over their heads. As the two of them got into the car, Jian Ruolan hastily took a tissue from her bag to wipe off the water on her face and hands. Seeing Xian Zihao's wet body, she took another tissue and wiped his face. Xian Zihao didn't resist and just looked at her with astonishment. Jian Ruolan almost used a small packet of tissue before she finally finished wiping his hair and face. Suddenly, she saw a drop of water running down his cheek to his chin. She hurriedly took a piece of tissue and carefully wiped the water droplets on his chin. Her eyes accidentally met a pair of dark eyes that were watching her. Only then did she notice how intimate their postures were. Almost half of Jian Ruolan's body was close to Xian Zihao, and they were very close. Jian Ruolan could not refrain from freezing. Seeing the faint smile on Xian Zihao's eyes, she quickly pulled her hand away and rushed back to her seat. She held the tissue tightly in her hand and looked at the slow-moving traffic ahead. While there was no more traffic, there were too many cars in front and behind them, so their car moved slowly. Xian Zihao was in no hurry to start the engine. Instead, he casually put his hand on the steering wheel and looked at the woman next to him with a face full of laughter. His clear voice brought a different meaning. If I remember correctly, tonight is our wedding night. The corner of Jiang Rulan's mouth twitched as she held the tissue tightly. Her lips moved slightly, but she could not utter a word. In the end, she closed her mouth and pretended not to hear him. Out of the corner of her eye, she detected Xian Zihao approaching her. He pressed his hand to the car seat next to her head, and Jiang Rulan backed away in shock. She was almost trapped within his reach. Xian Zihao just looked at her with a non-smiling smile. The look in his eyes changed under the headlights of the car, yet he said nothing. He just looked at Jiang Rulan like that, watching her face as she was forced into a corner. Jiang Rulan felt a little awkward because they both have a legitimate relationship. Jiang Rulan, how are we going to spend the night? Chapter 44. Teasing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xian Zihao moved closer, and the smell of tobacco lingered in her nose. His voice was soft and seductive. His pale lips brushed her ears. Jiang Rulan could not contain her nervousness as she turned her body to the side to avoid the attack. At the same time, she raised her hand to block the incoming attack, preventing him from approaching. I am your husband. Xian Zihao laughed softly. At the same time, he held Jiang Rulan's hand. Jiang Rulan's eyes widened in shock. The deep light in Xian Zihao's eyes was like a dark wave that nearly engulfed her. She was forced into a corner, and there was no way out for her anymore. It was still raining, and the atmosphere in the car became more intimate. She wanted to curse Xian Zihao's mother for giving birth to a man like him. Jiang Rulan immediately bit her lip, and her doe-eyes stared into Xian Zihao's evil-looking eyes. His unique yet pleasant smell completely enveloped her. She knew they were already a legal couple, even though no wedding ring was in her hands or anyone else was witnessing their marriage. Their relationship was already like the truth. She wasn't an innocent girl. With their current relationship, it was clear that Xian Zihao will do something to her at this time. Jiang Rulan's red lips trembled from the bite. With a struggle and hesitation, she said, You're joking, aren't you? Xian Zihao stared at her for a long time. What do you think? She took a deep breath and suddenly let go of the hand that was between them. Closing her eyes, she gritted her teeth tightly, wondering if they would have intercourse on such a stormy night. As soon as she closed her eyes, Xian Zihao's lips indented gradually. His gaze landed on her pale face. He lowered his head and slowly approached. Jiang Rulan was so nervous that all the hair on her body stood up. Suddenly she heard a small crack coming from in front of her. Jiang Rulan immediately opened her eyes and looked at the man who had returned to the driver's seat in astonishment, then lowered head to see the seatbelt on her body. Her face immediately flushed. She adjusted her sitting posture with embarrassment, not daring to look at the man who was in a very good mood in the driver's seat again. Xian Zihao's words immediately destroyed this strange atmosphere. When you see a strange car in the future, don't get in the car. He suddenly changed the topic. Jiang Rulan looked at Xian Zihao. You didn't tell your family about the marriage. He restarted the engine and didn't answer her question. However, the answer was obvious. Why did he do that? Was it because Xian family will not accept their marriage? Chapter 45. Moving in. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was midnight when they returned to H City. Xian Zihao stopped the car. One of his bodyguards, Su Jiu, took out Jiang Rulan's luggage from the car's bonnet and walked straight to the entrance door. As she got out of the car, Jiang Rulan realized that there was also a combination of several floors of high-rise buildings and garden-type residential areas. She realized that this was a newly built upscale apartment house called Greenville Residence in H City. This residential area didn't have many houses and was primarily made up of several apartments that were exclusive to each other. Just as she walked in, the security guard at the entrance deliberately looked at her twice, as if Xian Zihao had never brought a woman with him to his house. She did her best to ignore the guard's probing gaze as she entered the fire-resistance door. She walked a few steps to the right and stopped. Jiang Rulan stood in front of the door hesitantly. Xian Zihao stood in the living room with a glass of clear water in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He took a sip of water and looked at her indifferently. "Why don't you come in?" Jiang Rulan came back to her senses and stepped forward. After changing her slippers, she walked in hesitantly. She glanced at the cup of coffee on the tea table and did not touch it. Her eyes looked around the house and she was impressed with the modern interior design. Seeing that she did not like coffee, Xian Zihao did not say anything. He put down his glass and took off his wet jacket. "I'm going to take a shower. There are 2 bedrooms, a study, and a cloakroom on the 2nd floor. I don't use them much, you can take any room you like." With that, Xian Zihao pointed with his chin at the door in the corner near the spiral staircase upstairs. That was just a brief introduction to his residence before he turned and walked to the bathroom. Jiang Rulan's mind finally calmed down. Looking around, one can see that all the rooms were designed cleanly and simply. All furniture was mostly black, white, and gray. Judging from the arrangement and slippers in front of the door, it looked like only a few people were coming to his house. Even the slippers at her feet were a new pair she just took from the shoe cabinet. It made Jiang Rulan wonder if Xian Zihao had lived here so long. The surroundings are soothing, but the sound of water in the bathroom makes her even more restless. 10 minutes later, the bathroom door reopened. Xian Zihao walked out of the bathroom with only a towel around his waist. Beove droplets of water still hung on his naked upper body, his pale skin radiating like the charm of a palace prince in the sun. His muscular body was very sexy, from top to bottom, it had no extra fat, everything was very nice. Chapter 46. Moving into. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jiang Rulan looked at Xian Zihao without blinking. She should have turned away when his eyes came in contact with her, but she could not help but stare at the fresh, clean man in astonishment. Was this man really her husband? He was a 20.8-year-old man and was a respected and famous General Xian's grandson, but at this time, President Xian, standing in front of her, seemed utterly different from President Xian she had met before. Jiang Rulan watched intently as Xian Zihao wiped his hair and forgot that she should look away. Xian Zihao only gave an indifferent look before turning around and entering the bedroom. About 2 or 3 minutes later, Xian Zihao, neatly dressed, came out of the bedroom and placed a bunch of keys on the coffee table next to Jiang Rulan. "Try not to go back to your previous residence as much as possible. You can stay here from now on. If there is anything you need, you can buy it from a nearby store." With that, he placed the bank card next to the key, raised his hand to straighten his shirt cuff, then turned to pick up his car key and headed for the door. Seeing him about to leave, Jiang Rulan suddenly asked without thinking, "You're not staying here?" Xian Zihao stopped and turned his head to look at her. Jiang Rulan immediately realized the meaning behind her words. It was normal for someone to misunderstood the meaning of the words she had uttered. She silently cursed herself 1,000 times in her heart and explained with a smile, "What I mean is, it's too late. If you don't stay here, then where will you stay?" Xian Zihao looked at her face without expression, his thin lips moving slightly. "I think I should explain a few things beforehand." He walked closer to her. Xian Zihao bent down slowly as his eyes focused on astonishment in Jiang Rulan's eyes. He lifted her chin and said in a very soft voice, "This marriage is a marriage contract, and we're married not because of love." Jiang Rulan frowned and removed her chin from his hand. "I'm very aware of it. Of course, if you don't want to be lonely, I can carry out my duties as your husband in some way." The corners of Xian Zihao's mouth were curved as he smiled. "Jiang Rulan, please do not get too involved in this matter." The door opened and closed. Jiang Rulan seemed to have just come out of her surprise and she turned her head, looking at the thick door. She picked up the key on the table and threw it at the door. "Damn it! Who's going to fall for such a deep trick? The man stopped when he heard the woman's roaring voice. Xian Zihao looked back at the door silently. Jiang Rulan sipped her cold coffee and cursed, "Who wants you as a husband? Not me." Chapter 47. Insignificant as dust. You are listening at novelfull.audio. For 2 months, Jiang Rulan worked as usual and stayed at Greenville residence safely and healthily. Because of its security facilities and alarm system, she was rarely harassed by malicious media. Jiang Bingqing had also disappeared since the day she argued with her at D family's Flower Garden Hotel. Maybe she had returned to G City, or maybe Xian Zihao had dealt with her. At least, in these 2 months, Jiang Rulan's life was very peaceful. With the exception of 3 things. 1. Jiang Yijuan had to rush back to F City for a few days due to problems at his workplace, but when he finally found out about her marriage with Xian Zihao, he flew back to H City angrily. 2. The engagement ceremony of Han Shuigang and Ling Feier will be held at the 7-star Royal Hotel in the city center in half a month. 3. For the entire 2 months, Xian Zihao did not appear at all. It was as if he had disappeared from the world, not even returning to check on her at Greenville residence. This often made Jiang Rulan hallucinate that she did not marry Xian Zihao, Han Shuigang did not betray her, no skeleton or heartbreak, no Ling Feier, no Jiang Bingqing, and all that happened 2 months ago was just a nightmare for her. Because of her relationship with Xian Zihao, her company was often invited to all kinds of banquets and Jiang Rulan couldn't even refuse from not attending. Time passed like lightning, and Jiang Rulan was invited to a party at the King's Garden Hotel, where she would interview the Bureau of Civil Affairs, taking photographs of the progress of road renovations on the street where a hole appeared on a rainy night. She had to go to various companies to read the news, interview businesses from various large companies, and even, for some specific reason, follow some relevant units and investigate the situation. In the last 2 months, she had conducted 3 interviews at Xian Group, but not once she met with Xian Zihao. Jiang Rulan knew that they are initially people from 2 different worlds and that they should not have interacted from the beginning. Just like 7 years ago, when she crawled to his feet and used all her strength to grab his pants and plead for his help, but none of it in his memory. He lightly walked through her world, causing a huge uproar. Yet in his world, she was as insignificant as dust. Her marriage certificate was placed at the bottom of the box as if all of that had never happened. Chapter 48. Rumors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Did you hear? The very popular Hong Kong actress took part in our city construction exhibition a few days ago and was lucky enough to shake hands with Xian Zihao. She had used her company's good relationship with Xian Zihao to find opportunities to go to Xian Group and send some invitation letters as ambassador. Did President Xian go and meet her? I heard that she was going to jump off a building, but didn't she fail? Aya, why are you so surprised? Did she really dare to jump out of the building and commit suicide? That's just her trick. The question now is, did President Xian go and meet her? How is it possible? I saw the list of people participating in this important business gathering in Beijing in the news yesterday. Many Xian top executives have met in Beijing over the last 2 days, so President Xian will definitely go to Beijing as well. I suddenly remembered that 2 years ago, before President Xian became CEO of Xian Group, there was a woman who was fascinated by him and wanted to commit suicide. He knew what had happened at the time, but he did not go and the woman cut off her wrist. I've only heard his rumors, but I've never seen his real face. Do you remember the news 2 months ago? How clear were the pictures in magazines and newspapers? Xian Zihao turned his body to the side and smiled softly at his fiancée. My God, he's so cool. Damn, I cut a picture of his fiancée and threw it away. I kept his picture on my phone and watched it every day until it dripped with my saliva. Huh, you're so funny. There's nothing I can do about it. If I could see him in person, he might be so handsome that I would faint. Stop dreaming. Look at what you said. Seeing and observing handsome men is a woman's natural duty. President Xian must love his wife a lot, right? The man who loves his wife is the most charming. Unfortunately, the hearts of many women who adore President Xian were all ruined. Woo that I'm one of them. Jiang Ruolin was very hungry when she returned from an interview on Monday afternoon. She walked to KFC and ordered a hamburger and fries. As she ate, she overheard some fashionable girls chatting non-stop from a table not far from her. She remembered that she still had some things to tell Xiom Rugang. Worried that she would forget, she quickly looks for her phone in her bag, and accidentally, an exquisite card fell out. Chapter 49. Naive. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jiang Ruolin lowered her gaze and looked at the card on the ground. She bent down to pick it up and saw Han Shuigang and Ling Feier's names written on it, as well as the date and time of the engagement. A week ago, Ling Feier went to her company and entered her office unhindered. Under the gaze of her colleagues, she placed this delicate engagement invitation on her desk. Jiang Ruolin, I heard you married to Xian Zihao. Why is there no wedding? But don't worry. In the next 15 months, I welcome you to my engagement party with Han Shuigang. Ling Feier beamed as her slender fingers pushed the invitation towards Jiang Ruolin. I believe young Madame Xian will give the Ling family face, right? You definitely won't miss it, won't you? The scene from a few days ago passed before her eyes as she held the invitation card tightly in her hand. They're getting engaged. Ha! During the 7 years she left Jiang family, Han Shuigang was one of those who once gave her 4 years of happiness. A full 4 years. 1,460 days and nights. Han Shuigang, who was once admired by all the girls at the university. Han Shuigang, who wore the woolen gloves when he walked past her with red cheeks due to winter. Han Shuigang, who had invited her to dance at the school anniversary ceremony. Han Shuigang, who held her hand and said that he liked her because she was innocent and silly. Han Shuigang, who got a surprising result because of his hard work, despite having an average family background. Han Shuigang, who had loved her so much that he was willing to die with her. Han Shuigang, who had kissed her on the face after she graduated from school, said that he would marry her. Lan Lan, no matter where or when, as long as you need me, I will be by your side. Lan Lan, stop sneaking around. Just wait. One day, I will make a name for myself. At that time, you just need to stay at home and be pampered by me. The past was like smoke. Everything had changed in the end. Did Ling Feier gave her this invitation card because she wanted her to see the man she, Jiang Ruolin, once loved holding the hand of another woman? Jiang Ruolin knew full well that she would be humiliated, but she had no other way out. If she didn't go, they might think it was because she was afraid and still couldn't forget Han Shuigang. How much courage and perseverance it would take for her to appear flawless at their engagement party. Outside the VIP entrance of the airport. When Secretary Du saw Xian Zihao, he quickly approached him. He handed the file to him. President Xian, this is the file you requested. As you'd expected, they've been aware of recent changes and have begun to be unable to sit still. Xian Zihao took the file and walked towards the parking lot while flipping through it. His cell phone rang. He saw numbers and traces of shock across his eyes. Mom. He picked up the phone, his eyes still on the file in his hand. Zhan An's voice was heard from the end of the phone. I just got home today and your father started arguing with me because of you. No matter what, you are still my son. Why didn't you tell me you were married? Your grandfather was so angry that he did not even leave the room. When did you get married? Why are you hiding this from me? Xian Zihao sighed and said, Mom, you just got home. Rest first. I'll see you later. Stop changing the topic. Tell the truth, are you really married? Xian Zihao opened the car door and threw the file into the passenger seat. His eyes suddenly saw a glimpse of the umbrella that had been left in the box by the door. He paused, then got into the driver's seat and stretched out his hand to take the umbrella. The light pink umbrella was a bit old, and the design on the edge of it was very simple and clean. There was also actually a plastic beaver tied to the umbrella holder. Chapter 50. Bring my daughter. In law to meet me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jeannin, who didn't hear her son's response, immediately became anxious. Son. If you are married, bring the girl here so that your mother can meet her. Whose daughter is that girl? How do you know her? What is her last name? Mom, for half a year you have not returned home, shouldn't you be worried about your son? Xian Zihao put aside the umbrella with a funny face on his face. He put on a wireless earpiece and started the engine. He drove his car out of the parking lot. I'm more concerned with my daughter. In law. No matter what the girl's background is, as long as she's someone my son likes, I will definitely approve. On the other hand, your grandfather and father, these two stubborn old men, always wanted you to marry Cui Lucian. I can tell that you love her and spoiled her a lot, but you don't want to marry her, do you? Son, don't worry. I will handle your father and grandfather. But the condition is that you must let me meet my daughter. In law. Woo. If only I could hug my grandson now. Xian Zihao's face suddenly darkened. Why do you have to think so far? Am I wrong? Isn't it right now, young couples are very close to each other. Let's see if your grandfather and father would have objected once you had a child. Feeling helpless, Xian Zihao raised his hand to rub his forehead and sighed. Mom, I'm driving. When will you bring my daughter. In law to meet me? Jeannin refused to stop this conversation. I will arrange it as soon as possible. Finally, Jeannin agreed and ended the call. Xian Zihao took off his earpiece and accidentally glanced at the umbrella next to him. Bnoel Dem Xian Group, Chief Executive Officer Office. The red light at night shone through the large glass windows into the spacious and bright office. The room was quiet, with only the sound of files and the sound of pages flipping. Knock. Knock. Knock, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Xian Zihao paused. His black-inked eyes were slightly raised as he looked at the rosewood doors. Usually, when someone wanted to meet him, Secretary Du will make an appointment and informed him in advance. Moreover, the news of his return to H City was not leaked. Cui Lucian was the only one who could enter and left the Xian building at will. Come in. His thin lips moved a little while answering indifferently. The door was pushed open from the outside. A slender figure appeared in front of the door. Cui Lucian in a light blue dress had a mischievous smile on her face. She tucked out her tongue at him and asked, Zihao, am I interrupting your work? Xian Zihao closed the file. Why are you here? Cui Lucian smiled sweetly. As she turned and closed the door, chestnut hair fell on her shoulders. She turned, placing her hand behind her back and lifted her little feet, which were covered in a pair of white high-heeled shoes. She walked closer to his desk under his unperturbed gaze, then tilted her head and looked at him with a smile. You asked me to go with Bingqin to the Maldives for a vacation. Look at my body now. I am very tanned. I even went to the United States, and then came to Boston, wanting to see Guiying and Mom. Guiying was very busy, so I couldn't meet her. I just saw Mom, and she came back with me. You still don't know, right? Xian Zihao calmly looked at her. My mother had refused to come back for years, afraid that she will strike up a ruckus whenever she meets my dad. Why is she willing to come back this time? His voice was dull and flat, unhappy or angry.